possibly many more remember Judy, but with great pleasure I introduce Linda Fryd talking about her mother.
Well, there's no microphone, so I've apparently got to speak up nice and loud and clear. Can you hear me at the back?
No.
Who said no? Well, it's very difficult to know where to start, but I know where I'm going to start, except that I've found this little bit, well, I found several obituaries. Mum died in 2000, the year 2000, you know, bringing in the new millennium, yes, going out with the new. Anyway, this is, it says contact press office, so I think it says notes to editors, so I think what it is something that was sent to the editors of newspapers and so on. Anyway, it says, Judy Fryd started a revolution 50 years ago when she responded to a letter in Nursery World asking if there were other parents trying to cope with a learning disabled child. They didn't use the phrase learning disabled back then, I hasten to say. The word was used to speak about people with a learning disability was backward. Anyway, Judy died. This association has now, together the parents formed the Association of Parents of Backward Children. This association has now grown into the largest disability organisation in the country, Mencap. That was said in 2000. Today, largely thanks to Judy Fryd, many of the people who would 50 years ago, now 73 years ago, have been kept in long-stay hospitals for the subnormal and are now living independently and enjoying paid employment. A bit I really wanted to quote for you is Lord Ricks, president of Mencap, said, Judy was where it all began. Faced with no services, no information and no support, faced with forceful prejudice round every corner, Judy and a small number of other parents in similar isolated situations started the fight that has become Mencap's fight. It was Judy and her eldest daughter Felicity who in the 1940s sowed the seeds of Mencap and drew other dedicated parents together for support. Mencap will continue the fight for choice, opportunity and inclusion for all children and adults with a learning disability. Remember, this is Lord Ricks speaking. This is Judy's legacy. So that's what he said, and is quoted as saying. I've got an obituary from the Harpenden History Society. I've got an obituary from one of the key people in the Harpenden Labour Party, both of which were very important to my mum. However, I don't apologise for starting with the Fryd family. So that's what I'm going to do to start with. A little bit of background, because without this, you won't know how, how necessary it was for Judy to do this. So Judy and John Fryd moved from Leeds to Harpenden in 1941 with two infant daughters, Felicity, born in 1938, and Pat, born in 1940. They soon added to their family, once they were down in Harpenden, with the birth of Peter in 1942 and with me in 1945, both of us born in the Red House. This, of course, was during and just before, in Phyllis' case, World War II. A few bombs fell in the field near our house and close to the main railway line, which is obviously where they were aimed at, which ran alongside Westfield Road past the end of our cul-de-sac. John and Judy were faced with having to put blackouts at the windows and were supplied with gas masks for all the family. Mine was a tubular, whole body affair, because I was very little, and resembling our Goblin electric vacuum cleaner. Pat, my sister, who is still alive, I'm glad to say, had nightmares about me being sucked up the vacuum cleaner. God only knows what kind of nightmares Philly had. On the other hand, she may have found the masks simply intriguing rather than terrifying. She was 7 when I was born, but already showed the behavioural signs of the autism that was going to severely limit her cognitive development for the remainder of her 55 years. Sadly, she died in 1993. Although she appeared to have scant understanding of her relationship to the world and the people around her, she was alert and curious in nature and had boundless energy. So as she grew, she became increasingly difficult to control and keep tabs on. One day, a neighbour down the road caught sight of her toddling along the railway line. This is the main line from St Pancras up to the north. Right. And she managed to rescue her and bring her home. Another time, she got out of a bedroom window and Mum found her edging along the narrow window ledge. Mum pulled her back into the room in time to save her falling to her death. Mum would often take her and Pat down to the village. As some of you will remember, Harpenden High Street was called back then. And once, when they were in Anscombe's to buy sewing thread, Philly, seeing a box of hat pins on the counter, said to the assistant in a sing-song tone, echoing Mum's clear, cheerful voice, "£half a pound of hat pins, please." A typical aspect of the quite profound level of autism that Philly had was that she would remember and echo words spoken to her previously. So that, for instance, if offered something to eat that she didn't want, she would answer in Mum's vocal register, "Don't you want it? Don't you want it after all?" In other words, "I don't want it," and she would shush it away. "Don't you want it after all?" Basically, she didn't have the distinct sense of her own self to be able to refer to herself as I or me, though she heard us all self-referring in this way. But these words didn't seem to mean anything to her. And she would call us by each other's names and get us all mixed up, although Mum and Dad were understood as Mummy and Daddy for some reason. Anyway, being parents to Philly, the eldest, and 3 of us younger children proved quite stressful for both John and Judy in those difficult war years. Dad was in the Home Guard because of a long-standing health issue, and he had abdominal pain all his adult life. Yet, like Mum, he withstood his suffering and met his responsibilities as a father and in the community. And he held the position of town clerk, Harpenden town clerk, right up to his death in 1981. Their efforts to get Philly into nursery school failed due to entrenched attitudes and inadequate training of nursery staff, and ignorance, basically. Forced to fall back on her own devices, Judy did her best to homeschool Philly, teaching her the alphabet and building words with her. Thanks to an earlier holiday in Germany, Mum and Dad had a smattering of German and taught her some German words and folk songs from a book Mum had brought back with her. Philly loved unusual words and loved to spell them out loud, including the German word for hospital, Krankenhaus, and cake, Kucha. She loved to say these words but she also loved to spell them. Well, I don't think she spelled Crankton House because there are too many letters. Mum, an accomplished pianist, would play songs and classical pieces to distract Philly, who loved to dance around in a wide circle in the middle of the sitting room, her face beaming smile. And she was elsewhere. She was just elsewhere. But where were we? The rest of us, we were sitting on chairs around the outside of this very wide circle, doing our own thing, basically, reading or listening and watching. Walking along with Philly and Pat and Peter one day, Mum was starting to answer a question from Peter. Mummy, why is the sky blue? When Philly, who had been walking slightly apart, came alongside and calmly observed, sky is a blue lampshade. And then went back to strolling and apparently musing in her own world. It showed that she was awake to conversations that were going on within the family. But the big problem for Philly was her volatility, her unexpected or unpredictable outbursts. One second. When frustrated by her own inability to express whatever feelings, wants, pains, fear she may have had, she would wail in a high, loud, operatic sounding aria so that she could not be ignored. This was actually quite clever, but also very disruptive. She also had little episodes of petit mal, kind of little, you know, her eyes would flicker and go up and she, you know, she'd not be really with us somehow, which I found quite frightening until I learned to wait for her to come down from them. We all learned from Mum and Dad to say gently to her, Philly, come back to earth. It usually did the trick, eventually. Anyway, we kids had little idea or understanding of our parents agonising, confronted with the lack of available help from the child welfare services. The NHS, of course, wasn't created until 1947. Philly was already 9 years old. They managed to get her enrolled for 2+ years residential schooling at the first Camphill School in Aberdeen, a settlement for children with special needs based on the Rudolf Steiner theosophic principles of education and communal living. She had to be fetched home, however, when the grant aid that they had secured ran out. She showed great vocal musicality and had clearly had some positive experiences there. But her old distress and frustration soon returned and her behaviour worsened. My parents were forced to seek her admission for a short period of residential care, so they thought, in Selbarns Hospital, a nearby residential institution. This was the beginning of the rest of Philly's life, being fetched home in Dad's car for sleepovers, but usually drugged with mild sedatives and not so mild sedatives, and a big bottle of her weird-smelling golden draft, as it was called euphemistically, to keep her calmed, but always having to be returned according to the arrangement. This may have been from Knapsbury, which was her next place of residence. This golden draft stank. It was horrible, and the smell of it used to pervade the whole house. Ugh, it's horrible to think of it. And of course, Philly stank of it too, of course, and she had to drink it. Anyway, Philly's affective development was unfortunately impaired. She was never moved to affection by our dog Barney, or any of the cats we had over the years. If, say, Topsy jumped up on her lap, she would sort of just push her off, you know, like that. Very, you know, without any thought of well, cats being cats, of course, they land on 4 legs, don't they? So they're all right, but anyway. She didn't perceive the rest of us kids as her siblings, having no concept of sister or brother or of herself as a distinct individual. She would refer to herself as you and what was hers as your, but not very often because she didn't really understand possession. Although she did have some possessions. She had a box of tricks, which was a wooden box containing all sorts of strange odds and ends that she picked up from the hedgerows, and then she had a fascination for things brass candlesticks and things. Anyway, I'm going into too much detail about that, but I just wanted you to sort of see what the background was. But on reaching her majority, Philly was sectioned, and my parents lost their parental rights. Though they could come and visit, take her for walks within the precincts and so on. The medical authorities, having decided that a prefrontal leucotomy, or leucotomy, they called it a leucotomy, would be a good way to permanently control her behaviour. So having decided that, but they had to, I suspect by law, of course, seek Judy and John's consent for this. But Mum and Dad had no real effective say and felt forced to comply. So Philly had that operation. Mum always said that this did not have the expected effect, because it was supposed to kind of it was supposed to render the person unable really to have affective feelings and all that, and not be interested, not appreciate music and things like that. But Philly did not lose her musicality, and she could recall apparently all the songs and music she had adored. However, she couldn't learn a musical instrument. After Dad died in 1981, Judy was no longer to even think of having Philly home for a sleepover or whatever. So I too agonised, and I still do, over what Philly must have endured day after day in these institutions. Yes, that's sort of family background. There's a little bit I want to quote from the letter that we sent to people who came to Mum's funeral and sent lovely letters and things. Yeah. Yes. So what I wanted to add to that was, she gave us kids a great childhood and upbringing, and her granddaughter Ellie, who I'm glad to say is here, with her granddaughter Ellie, who is my daughter, and my granddaughter Olivia, yes, are here. Anyway, so she gave her granddaughter Ellie much love and support. Each of us feels proud and grateful for that. Our admiration and pride in witnessing her ongoing commitment to social justice and full rights for all with mental and emotional disabilities, as for the deprived and oppressed, was a privilege we shared with many. And what a superb pianist and dedicated chorist. Like many, we already miss her jolly ways and her humorous wink. She had a lovely wink, which she used a lot. And we are thankful that her memory will live on for us all in so many ways. And mentioning Choral Society leads me perhaps to just, I won't read the whole thing, but they said she loved music and was still singing with us just a year or so ago at the grand age of 90. Well, that was in 2000. So there. Some of this has already been said. Yeah, Judy was a truly remarkable lady whose life's work will continue as a lasting memorial to her. We shall miss her greatly, said the Choral Society. Yeah. Oh, and they said, meanwhile, we would like to dedicate this evening's performance to Judy. In retrospect, given Judy's love for children, the choice of programme seems especially fitting, including, as it does, Handel's Foundling Hospital Anthem. So that's the Choral Society. So I wrote this bit. Well, perhaps I should read John Kitching's bit, because John Kitching was I've been trying to get hold of John Kitching. I'm not getting any answer from his phone and so on, and I don't know where he is or what. But his daughter Penny is in Harpenden, and a lovely, wonderful woman she is. So this is John Kitching, a Harpenden parent and stalwart of Harpenden Mencap, and he addressed Alison's lunch club. I don't know who Alison is, or was, and this is in February 2005. And he says, "Don't worry, you're not going to be subjected to a long plea for money. Instead, as Max Bygrave used to say, I want to tell you a story. It's the story of a remarkable woman, a Harpenden lady, who almost single-handedly changed the way society looks at and treats people with a mental handicap. Her name was Judy Fryd, and I had the privilege of meeting her on a number of occasions. I first met her at Harpenden Choral Society, where she was someone with a great sense of fun, who lost her place like the rest of us, sang wrong notes like the rest of us, and obviously had a great zest for life. I soon realised, however, that she was someone special, because at periodic intervals we were told about another award for Judy, such as the Award of Merit by Harpenden Town Council, and in 1996 the CBE from, not the Queen, she wasn't there, but it was Prince Charles, as he then was, who served her with the badge. But it was when she learned that my daughter was handicapped that she fixed me with those piercing blue eyes and said, "You must continue the fight for inclusion." So when I looked into her remarkable history, I realised that that was what she had done all her life. Judy was born in 1909. She read economics and political science at Ruskin College, Oxford, where she met her husband John. They married in 1936, and their first daughter Felicity was born 2 years later. Judy was a political animal at heart, having joined the Labour League of Youth in her teens. She once said, "My career was always going to be in politics. I just didn't realise it was the mentally handicapped corner I would be fighting." What happened was that Felicity had real problems at home, and particularly at school. Well, what school? No school, where she was rejected after half a day as being too disruptive. Her next school, a private one for Down's children, which was down in Dorking, said she was not suitable and told my parents to remove her after 24 hours. So they had to go and remove her, and that was it. Of course, Philly didn't have Down syndrome, and they expected her to fit into their sort of regime and have the same sort of responses as Down's young people had, and she didn't. She was very different, had different urges and all that. For Felicity was what we now know as autistic. She was rejected at every turn, and Judy encountered prejudice wherever she went in search for help. Very distressed and angry, Judy decided to take action. In 1946, she channeled her anger and disappointment through the letters pages of Nursery World magazine. Within a month, more than 1,000 people had been in touch, mainly mothers, often with harrowing stories. More than one mother had been told by her GP, "Forget about that baby, go home and have another one." Thus was formed what is now known as Royal Mencap. Its first title was the Association of Parents of Backward Children, A very 1940s title, don't you think? Yeah. Notice the association of parents, because that was the key thing. It was an organisation of parents, for parents, to help them to be in touch with each other, and surely they did too. And they set up groups all over the country in their own areas. Through Mencap, Judy campaigned tirelessly for better education and facilities for handicapped children. And in my view, she achieved two significant breakthroughs. The first is well known. Following her evidence to a Royal Commission on Mental Handicap, Parliament passed the Education Handicapped Children Act in 1971, not so long ago. This overturned the old belief that handicapped children could not be educated and gave them the same right to be educated as everyone else. 1979 was not too long ago. Penny, my daughter, this is Penny Kitchen, was born in 1976, and I think it's shocking to think that until then, parents' only choices were to pay for private education if they could find it and if they had the money, to have the children at home 24 hours a day with the stigma attached to having a handicapped child, or having the child certified as mentally defective and have them confined in places like Shenley or Selbarns. The second, wait a minute, the first is well known, the first what? I've forgotten what it was now. Oh, breakthroughs, significant breakthroughs. The second is not so well known. She enlisted the aid of Brian Rix, the star of the Whitehall farces such as Simple Spyman. Some of you can remember, I'm sure, remember the Whitehall farces. I used to like watching them on the telly, being relayed on the telly. And he was very talented. He had you in stitches, didn't he? Always trousers falling down was one of the things that always seemed to happen. Anyway, Brian Rix had a Down syndrome daughter, and he recalls how Mum met him in his dressing room during rehearsals. He was in overalls and covered in whitewash, but once again those piercing blue eyes were used, and he was hooked. He is still president, well, was, unfortunately died not that many years ago. But then he was still president of Royal Mencap, although over 80, and has worked tirelessly on its behalf. Royal Mencap, says John, is now one of the largest charities and campaigning organisations in the country. It has a turnover of more than £100 million and enlists the services of more than 20,000 volunteers to help its staff. Everyone has heard of Mencap, and that's down to Judy's campaigning energy and sheer bloody-mindedness. She refused to take no for an answer. Oh, sorry, my mouth dries up. For an answer. As I said, she was a Harpenden lady, and near her home in 1959 she founded Harpenden Mencap with 8 other parents. Well, she kind of sort of prompted them, you know, they all did it. Initially it organised outings, parties and a playgroup, but they had a vision of establishing their own centre to provide daycare and emergency respite relief so that parents could get a break. This vision was eventually realised in 1980 when they raised enough funds to buy a house in Douglas Road, Harpenden, Stairways, which was converted to provide short-term care for up to 10 children at a time, and it was opened by Lord Renton. But it soon became clear that there was a real need for long-term care accommodation for adults with a wide range of disabilities. After another back-breaking round of fundraising was successfully carried out, Stairways was converted and a number of flats were created. Now, Harpenden Mencap provides long-term care for 23 adults at stairways. Of course, this is all out-of-date information, you realise. It also runs a number of social clubs, a shopping service for housebound elderly people, and a thriving shop, as was, roundabout in Southdown. Unfortunately, recently that had to close down, much to many people's disappointment, and it's now Jelly's, the meat shop, which has moved from the corner of Southdown. Anyway, roundabouts provided a valuable source of income, but it also provided learning disabled people with the opportunity to gain employment skills. You may feel that this is just a dry piece of social history, but what does it mean in practice? Here I can only speak from personal experience, so I hope you will indulge me. Our daughter Penny was born in '76. I won't go into too much details, but she was accepted by Hearts Education as such and went to St Luke's School in Redbourne, a special school, i.e. one which caters for learning disabled children, where she was treated marvellously by the staff and eventually achieved 2 GCSEs. When she was 16, she was taken in hand by the deputy head and a lovely and superbly efficient lady at Hearts Education. They arranged for her to go to a further education college in Grimsby. She was horribly homesick to start with, but it was the making of her. She grew in confidence and attained a number of non-vocational skills. When she came back, Hearts Social Services took over. After assessment, it was agreed that she could move into a flat at Stairways, which she shares, well, now she's at she's at another flat in Pine Court. Very independent. She shared this flat in Stairways with 3 others. She has a very fulfilled life, working 2 days a week at London Coney and taking the bus to work, helping on the shopping service and having a very active social life. It is now quite amazing the number of clubs, associations and opportunities that are available to her. She is out at least 3 nights a week. Some are run by volunteers, but others, such as Passport to Leisure, by social services. They are hotbeds of innocent gossip. The parents all agree that if you want to get news around Harpenden quickly, just tell flat 3 or 5 at Stairways. It's much more efficient than the local paper. She is not normal, but she now leads as normal and independent a life as possible, protected by laws against discrimination. In Judy's words, she is included. And all the way through, she's been supported by marvellous professional people. I'm sure they have always been there, but the point of the reforms over the last 35 years, starting with the 1971 Education Act and leading on to the 1995 Disability Discrimination Act, is that these people are now empowered. Local authorities are obliged to provide education and support for people like Penny. So this is their job. They have to do it. Of course, the quality of the support varies up and down the country, and I happen to think that Hearts are very good, but they cannot deny that they have to do it. So I think we've been very lucky, and what brings me up with a start is that if Penny had been my sister rather than my daughter, none of this would have been available to her. Most likely, she would either have vegetated at home or would have ended up in a mental institution with no life and no hope for the future. And that is thanks in no small measure to Judy Fryd, who started the battle against discrimination and prejudice. Very few social reformers have achieved such a sea change in people's attitudes in one lifetime, but she did. For that, I would rank her with great with great social reformers such as John Wesley and Charles Dickens. How about that? Of course, there is more to do. There always is, and a lot of this turns on resources, i.e. money. But the fight against discrimination is now firmly on the political agenda. In 2001, the most important government document in 30 years, focusing on people with a learning disability, was published, the Valuing People White Paper. And I come back to Judy, a small woman with tenacity, an indomitable spirit, and those piercing blue eyes. My family, they were very, but twinkly too, and winking. My family, like literally thousands of others, has been a major beneficiary of Judy's reforming zeal. I salute her for it. That's nice. That's really nice. So, I'm going to read what I prepared, and there might be a bit of repetition in this. I'll try not to bring too much repetition into it. Judy was born in 1909. You've got that now. I think it's been said several times. And grew up in North London with a younger brother, Richard. Her parents, Carrie and Harry Manning, were choir members. Goes back a long way in this choir business. And their interest in music helped, along with Judy's piano lessons, to form her as an accomplished pianist and fed her love of classical music, which played an important part in all our lives, but especially in Felicity's. A dedicated, patient and good-humoured, hands-on mum to her 4 children and doting grandma to my daughter Ellie, Judy was also a tireless campaigner for equal rights and entitlement and education and social provision according to their needs for all learning disabled children. Of her 4 children, I being the youngest, Felicity the eldest, born in Leeds in 1938, her mental development was considerably limited by what came to be labelled autism, although she did have interesting breakthroughs in understanding and awareness, which didn't always last. Pat was born also in Leeds in 1940, a new sister for Philly. Yes, I've said that, that's been said. That's been said, right. That's been said, right, that's good, I'm getting through the paragraphs here. Yes. Oh gosh, this is good. Yeah. Sadly, many of the really important changes were introduced too late for my sister, Felicity, to benefit significantly. And she spent all of her life, from her early teens, in institutional hospital care. Care, sometimes being a euphemism for neglect and covert ill treatment. Though she also had some kind and dedicated carers. We did meet some very nice people and kind people, you could tell. As with all hospital and other types of care provision today, unqualified casual workers were employed alongside NHS staff to do skilled and very often challenging work, usually on very low pay, to the detriment of the recipients. I know from my childhood and youth that Philly, who was very musical, despite or because of her autism, and having very limited apparent reasoning ability or understanding of her own and others' identity and relationship to her and each other, could be exceedingly difficult, even daunting to manage at times. Yeah, all right. As a small child, I was often terrified of her strange ways, her panic-stricken wailing, her arias, as we called this, and her strong grip on my wrists at times. And sometimes she'd have her petit mal incidents while holding on to my wrists. And remember, I was 7 years younger than her. But we all learned to cope with her behaviour during her fortnightly weekend homecomings, and we adjusted in our own ways. And then we would pile in the car again and take her back to the hospital on Sunday after tea. Mum was already a remarkable woman and talented public speaker ever since her youth as a member of the Labour League of Youth. Working as a secretary cum shorthand typist in the 1920s and 30s, she had fought for equal rights, pay and better conditions for secretaries and women generally. I haven't said this here, but actually there is a lovely picture of her somewhere. There's a picture of her on a soapbox at in Hyde Park Corner, saying it for the secretaries when she was still a young woman. Anyway, oh yes, she got union sponsorship for a student place at Ruskin College, Oxford, which is where she met my father, John, himself a Labour activist on the left socialist wing, and they became keen campaigners. Dad was a tower of strength, despite some chronic health difficulties, in assisting Mum both with raising us kids and with building the National Association, but especially with managing and caring for Felicity when she was at home. And Dad and Philly just adored each other. Both freelance journalists, Mum as editor of Parents' Voice, the association's mouthpiece cum newsletter, and Dad as public relations officer of the London Co-op and editor of its mouthpiece, The Beehive. They both took on positions of political responsibility, chairing endless committees and things, chairing committees on NHS bodies, Dad with the Northwest Area Health Authority. Oh, I think he was chairman of that as well at some point. Mum with the Northwest Regional Community Health Council, which was a watchdog. It was independent of the National Health Service because it was basically seeing to it that the health service bodies actually did what they were supposed to do and reminding them if they weren't. I think that's right. Is that about right,
No.
Gavin?
No.
Sorry, was that about right? You may
That's
not.
fine, yes. Do you want to show this thing at some
Oh
point?
yeah, I will do in a second. Okay. Yeah.
Good.
No, because you were on the. Gavin was on the Community Health Council with my mum. So yes. Mum was on the National Executive Committee of Mencap for many years, until taking a more backseat role as old age gradually took over. She travelled frequently, even then, up and down on the train to meetings in London, and helped like-minded parents, professionals and friends of the association with the establishment of local societies all over the country. She also spoke at international mental handicap conferences of worldwide associations of parents, researchers and interested parties. Notably, so Mum went to these conferences. She went to one in Jerusalem and she went to one in Rio de Janeiro and of course made speeches. She wouldn't go there not to make a speech. She was instrumental also in setting up Harpenden Society for Mentally Handicapped Children and Adults in 1959, which I mentioned, now renamed Harpenden Mencap. As a lifelong member of the Labour Party, she was honoured at the 1991 annual conference for outstanding service to the party and received a standing ovation at the conference, Labour Party conference, after her acknowledgement speech. And I'm sure that was in large part due to the awareness of her work on behalf of mentally handicapped people. She was a keen and active member of Harpenden History Society, as I mentioned, adding her voice to the contralto line, singing in many of their concerts, and even travelling with them to sing in Oslo in her 80s. I hope when I get to my 80s, I will travel to another foreign country to sing. I've already done it in Amsterdam with the choir that I'm in. Anyway, my father John, a well-known and respected local, oh wait a minute, I don't want to tell you things I've already told you. In the garden of the old council offices at Harpenden Hall, outside Dad's office, that Harpenden Hall used to be where the council offices were. There's a kind of a wall going round the garden at Harpenden Hall, next to the public halls. Not going to say anything about that. On the wall there are two brass plaques. They're not very shiny at the moment, but they're there, you can see them. Dedicated to each of John and Judy Fryd, and a magnolia tree that was planted in Dad's memory, along with a stone bench. Many of you will have admired that magnolia tree because it looks absolutely beautiful in that corner of the Harpenden Hall garden. Anyway, that was planted in my dad's memory. You can also go and sit on a bench in front of Harpenden public loos. Yes, outside Pizza Express. And actually, if there's one particular bench, and it's bang in front of the loos, and it's got a plaque on it dedicating. It was put by Harpenden Town Council in Mum's memory. Anyway, so you can sit on that bench, which was put there. Mum would have been so chuffed, as she used to wait nearby for the 3:07 bus at the George bus stop, close to the garden where her bench is. Felicity died in 1993 during the running down of Leavesden Hospital, which is the last hospital that she was in. I think she was there for about 15 years. Anyway, she died there. Too early, too soon, because of neglect, because they were running down the hospital, because they were intending to demolish it, and it was demolished and replaced by lots of well, I won't go into details. Actually, they've done quite a good job of there's lots of private housing now, executive homes, instead of these big blocks that used to be there. Anyway, her needs and health were inadequately served, which contributed to her premature and sudden death from pneumonia, they said, during a heavy bout of flu. Judy was vice president of Mencap in the last 20 years of her life, and ended as, and attended as many of its AGMs and conferences as she could. But she also often went along to the Harpenden Gateway Club to offer friendship and support to the young people she knew personally in her community. The Gateway Club being a club for older adults, now I think it's young adults. Anyway, she was honoured in 1968 with the Queen's MBE Award, and later in 1996 with the CBE, that was mentioned before, in her 87th year. She also featured as the subject of Esther Ranson's Heart of Gold TV series in 1996, being presented in the BBC studio with her golden heart brooch by friend and fellow campaigner and president of Mencap, Lord Brian Ricks. She was appointed founder patron of the Royal Mencap Society in 1998, 2 years before her death, in October 2000, aged 90. And in October 2009, Judy was honoured posthumously in a special edition of the Royal Mail commemorative stamps dedicated to 10 eminent Britons, among whom she and Mary Wollstonecraft, the famous 18th century feminist writer, are the only 2 women included, sharing the honour with 8 famous men. Yes, there's. I forgot to bring the stamps with me. I've got a few of the stamps, but there was Judy, and there was Mary Wollstonecraft. They sent us, my siblings and me, and did you get sent one? Yes, Ellie got sent one as well. Set of stamps, and also these cards, which you could send to somebody if you wanted to. But I've kept this, and then we've also got the ones to all the other people, very well-known people over the years who were all. There's another one there, Gavin. Yeah. Donald Campbell, water speed record broken. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sir Martin Ryle, radio survey responsible for the radio survey of the universe in 1959, Sir Matt Busby, Fred Perry, lawn tennis champion, Samuel Johnson, lexicographer, critic and poet, as you all know, William Gladstone, statesman and Prime Minister, and last but not least, Henry Purcell, composer and musician. What they all had in common was a 9 at the end. It was either at the end of their birth year, or their death year, or and so on. Well, Donald Campbell broke the water speed record in 1959. I shan't go on about that, but anyway, that was Mum was an eminent Briton. Yes. So there we are. That's what I was going to tell you about that. I will end, but I want to show you something first, which I have already just mentioned. But I will read something that Mum wrote called "The Long Struggle Continues." I will miss out some of it probably because I don't want to repeat things I've said already. But I did put a little postscript to it. That was in my mum's own words. And I've just done a short sort of. It was at the end, at the 70th birthday celebration. Of course, it's not the 70th now, is it? It's the 70. Sorry. Oh yes, in 2026. That's right. In 2026, it'll be the 80th birthday celebration of Mencap. So it's not far off, is it? No. Right. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed this is going to work.
Shall we try it?
Yeah, please. Oh, you won't be able to see it, will you? I just want to move this out. Yes, I'll put it over there.